Hi, I'm Iliana Limon-Romero here with Alicia DelGallo. Very excited about talking all things soccer. We're winding down toward the end.
I know.
Getting to the end of the regular season. Still much to consider, much to talk about, much to see from this team. Excited to see them close out the last game and then see what's ahead. Before we step to that, though, Alicia, I was hoping that you could take us back and talk with us about the last game. What you saw, what stood out. I know Orlando City had been going through a pretty tough stretch.
Yeah.
So what stood out from this last game where they actually got a win?
What stood out to me was that the players who haven't seen a lot of playing time under Christ, Rafael Ramos, Carlos Rivas, who's been seeing more playing time recently but still hasn't been in the game a lot, Christian Aguita, Mikey Ambrose, all in the lineup as starters, all really performing well for Christ. It looked like they had a lot of energy and spirit, and they really wanted the win, and they wanted to prove themselves to him. So Rafa especially, and Carlos obviously, they stood out to me, and I think they gave the team a little bit of heart and a little bit of spark that they had been missing for quite some time, and stated their case about where they think they should be moving forward with the team.
Fantastic. All right. We are taking your questions, as always, each week via Twitter to @OSLions. That's where people tweeted them in early, and we appreciate all those questions. Also, we're on Facebook Live, so if you want to send us any questions to the online stream, we're happy to answer them, and we're happy to see you joining us.
Yeah.
And we will check OS Lions one last time before we wrap up, as usual, just to see if there's anything else that's slipped in. But all right, let's go to our questions that were already asked from Donald B. Money Jr. at
Hey, Don.
Finslead It? Finslead Edit?
Single
edit. All right, I'm terrible at this. Donald, send me how to pronounce your handle.
I think we've asked him that before, too.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
stink.
It's been a while. All right. Thanks for doing the podcast. Very informative. Has Coach Christ impressed management enough not to be on a short leash next year? Ooh, very interesting question.
Yeah, so Christ isn't going to be on a short leash, at least for definitely not through next year. I don't think the end of this year was more about him getting acclimated and getting familiar with the players and who he wants to bring with him moving forward, more than it was about him proving himself and showing what he can do with the team. Since he inherited it mid-season, they were hoping for a turnaround or, whatever spark they could get from the coaching change, but realizing that it was a risky move and weren't expecting him to work any miracles right away. So next season will be the test, and I don't think he'll be on a short leash until after that.
One of the things that the management tried to stress when you interviewed them, when we talked with them in general about the coaching changes, they really felt like Adrian Heath, they counted pre-MLS time toward the amount of time they felt he was affiliated with the club. So they didn't feel like they were just giving him a year and a half.
Yeah.
They felt like they were really giving him a much longer run. And
8 to be exact is what they would say.
8 to be exact what they say. Now you can debate whether that's the case or not, or whether that was just something that was helpful for them in that time. But in the interviews with Christ, both of us have heard him say, no, I feel like he had more time.
Well, not only him, but Phil Rollins as well. I specifically asked in front of Christ during the first interview, I said, if, they kept saying, we're bringing someone in who we think can bring us to the playoffs now. And I said, if he doesn't bring you to the playoffs this year, is his job in danger? And Phil laughed at me, and he said, no, absolutely not. Like, this is a long-term investment. We brought someone in who we think can help us in the future. If he helps us right now, too, bonus.
Right. So there are many mechanisms that they're going to have to go through to assemble the type of roster that they want, but I'm not even convinced that through all of the MLS rules that all those changes will take place right in time for the beginning of next season. There's also some mid-season moves, so I would expect him to get a full year and then really into that next season before there's any sort of pressure, and that would actually take a team just not making any progress at all. So it remains to be seen, but not a short leash.
Nope.
All right, next question that came in via Twitter. Jeffrey at Volcano0201. In which lineup position we could see a change of player for next soccer season for Lions and Pride now? So where do you expect to see changes?
Okay, let's start with the Pride first, since we had a story out today about them, because they released a list of contract extensions and new contracts that are being offered, and what we found out through talking with Tom and the rest of the club is that really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that those players will 100% be here next season. It just means that they don't want to release them right now. So they want to work with them, get them in talks and discussions, offer them contracts so that they can use them in trades later, or waive players later if necessary. So the main positions, I mean, I think you're going to see changes across all positions on both teams, but for the Pride, Tom Sermanni really emphasized, he said he definitely needs a center back and he definitely needs a designated central midfielder. But that being said, he said there are 5 international spots on the team, and he wants to make sure that those players are starters, all 5 of them, and they'll look at position based on best player that they can get and what they need positionally. So I think you're going to see changes all over.
All right, so for the Pride and then for Orlando City, any particular position groups? It seems like the back line of both teams is really where the focus might be.
Definitely, I think you're going to see significant changes on the back line for Orlando City. That's obvious. Also, I think the midfield is kind of stabilized right now, but there's no real strong point in the defensive midfield, and I think they need to change it a little bit in order to go to the 4-4-2 that Kreis wants to go to next year. So I think you'll see some changes there. But again, Kreis said, we think we can make changes at every position. So there's not just one spot they're looking at, but definitely the back line a weak spot for sure.
So we hear interesting things from these coaches too, because they talk about not necessarily blowing up the roster. That's something they definitely say, oh, that's not really happening. That's not language that they stick to. At the same time, they're talking about changes that can have significant impact. So it sounds like it's more tinkering than just tossing everyone aside.
So basically, we're going to know more the beginning of November. November 1st and 2nd is when I've been told that Kreis will sit down and have conversations with the players about contracts and where they stand and what's going to happen with them moving forward. So we'll know a lot more then, and then as the offseason progresses, that's when the changes will be made. But at training today, we did interviews with Jason and Kaká, and as if it's a shock to anyone, both of them talked about Kaká's year next year with Orlando City. So at least we know one spot is safe.
Right. Never a question there. The interesting thing, I think, with Kaká is how well they perform and if they have a lot of momentum that makes them think about extending. He is one of the few where his contract was very clear. It runs through the end of next season.
Year, yeah.
And whether he chooses what he wants to do next with his soccer career. It's been a very impressive career, but he hasn't had the level of success he expected of himself in MLS.
Right.
So depending on how things go, the momentum behind the club, the excitement and the energy, and his health, it'll be interesting to see through next year if that goes a little further or if he chooses to do something else.
Yep, definitely.
All right. Just a reminder, we are getting questions. We welcome them via Facebook Live, so you can pop in there anytime and share questions with us, and you can still send them to @OSLions on Twitter. Let's go on to our next question. Kyle Meardo, Meards Beards.
Meards Beards.
Will there be a special pre-show event before the game on Sunday?
Okay, so there will be an event before the game, but it has to do with Pride and women's soccer mainly. They'll be screening the U.S. women's national team game on Sunday against Switzerland, and I believe that's being held in Minneapolis, I think. So they'll be screening that, and then at halftime of that game, they'll have a Q&A with Tom Sermanni.
Right.
So,
and he will be talking not just, he's open to a variety of questions. He's a very open person, a lot of fun to talk with. So he'll be talking not just about the U.S. national team and his impressions there, but also willing to share a few insights about the Pride. So that would be pretty interesting.
Yes.
It's going to be quite the moment for a lot of people. I mean, it's the last game in that stadium, presumably.
Right.
And I got to see a lot of Orlando City players take advantage of their last training session at Camping World Stadium, and then they headed over to the new stadium to take a tour while it was under construction.
Yeah.
Seemed pretty excited. Lots of interesting Facebook Live updates and photos on social media, so lots of fun.
Yeah, and also a lot of the corporate sponsors, representatives from all of Orlando City sponsors were at the training session today as well at the end, getting signed balls from Kaká and meet and greets with the players and things like that. So everybody, really excited to kind of say goodbye to Camping World Stadium the right way. And Orlando City's hoping to give them the victory.
Alrighty. Next question from Twitter. Chris at Orlando County SC. Any particular players resigned to the fact this is their final match in Orlando based on attitude or practice habits? So anybody sensing that this is it?
Honestly, I feel like the opposite. I feel like a lot of the guys have really stepped it up in training to try to prove themselves and prove that they want to be here next year. It's a place that, player after player has expressed interest in playing, that they like being here, they like the way the club is run, they like the way they're taken care of here, their families are settled in here if they've been here for a few years. So it's been quite the opposite. A lot of the guys, pretty much everybody, and I've been pulling as many as I can this week to get a full spectrum, talk to everybody, see how they're feeling entering this last week, and they're really fired up, a little worried, but trying not to think about it. I've been kind of the opposite, save for the guys who are injured. Mateos, Breckshay hasn't been training. Everybody else has been really on top of their game.
I thought I saw a little update from you on social media about Breckshay. What can you tell us about him?
He actually was at the training ground. He was at Camping World Stadium today. It was his first time out on the field since his injury last week, and he wasn't training full force with everybody, but he was doing some exercise on the side and watching them scrimmage. So it was just a good sign in general to see him out and about and walking around, doing some push-ups, things like that, because last week, at the end of last week, they were hoping that he would come back midweek last week, and he didn't. And at the end of last week, Christ said that he wasn't doing good. He couldn't walk without a limp. He was in a lot of pain. So just good progress to see him out and about, walking around, doing some drills.
Very interesting. All right, next question via Twitter. Ian F. at IFNORL. Is there any public discussion about tweaking the MLS schedule so the playoffs don't compete with the World Series in NFL? Oh, yeah.
I think public discussion, yeah. There's always a public discussion of people complaining about things like that. But as far as realistic discussions with Don Garber and MLS in general, I don't think there hasn't been. There's more discussions surrounding tweaking, scheduling, so it doesn't conflict with international duty. And they've done that this year a little bit. And he said, I spoke with him when he was in Montreal at the Montreal game. He said that they're continually looking to improve the schedule and do what they can to not conflict with the international windows. But the other sports in America, I mean, it's the tail end of the season anyways that they mostly overlap, but there's not going to be any real discussion about changing the season that extensively.
That's been the consensus from Dom Garber. I think that it was a huge move for them to even break away from the international windows, as you mentioned earlier this year. That was a big change in the way they approached MLS scheduling, and I would not anticipate that they would be able to do that even quite as much as they did. They're going to try when it makes sense and when it's helpful, but what you end up with is stacks of midweek games, really tough travel schedules, really challenging things for different teams. You just even look at Orlando City, look at where the closest team is travel-wise for them.
Columbus. I heard that on Columbus was the closest road game for them this year.
That's crazy. And even though you're getting Atlanta coming into the fold, that only helps for one trip. That's really not going to put you in a great position. So you just look at the wear and tear of the travel, and for every time you try to accommodate those other things, that just means you're pushing lots of midweek games. That means you're just stacking stuff up, everything that fans already hate. And so I think they're just going after building their core audience and sticking where they're at, and they can't worry about some of those other things that are really, it's just nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right. I think we have one more Twitter question coming up. ENF at IFNORL. Do you expect Rivas to make the 2017 roster? Has he shown enough?
This is a tough one because he hasn't shown enough. I don't think he hasn't started and played enough minutes this year. He doesn't think he started and played enough minutes. He said he's not happy with his year because of that reason. But in the minutes that he has played recently, he has shown a lot. He has shown a lot of skill, a lot of heart, a lot of speed that the team desperately needed. But today, specifically, Jason was asked about Rivas and how he could fit into the roster next year. And he said, first we need to decide if he's going to be on the roster next year. And then they'll decide if he's going to be a starter in the roster next year. So not a definite thing with Carlos. I personally would love to see him come back because I think he's an exciting player to watch on the field, and he brings a dynamic that the current roster doesn't have. But there's a lot to consider, and Jason was not willing to solidify that answer yet.
Well, he does have certain expectations out of players in that particular role. Carlos, if I'm not mistaken, is young DP. Is that not correct? So what were his expectations of designated players? If I recall correctly from earlier this year, Christ really said, you need maximum effort and maximum quality out of those players. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that's why he's been testing him a little more than some of the other guys who didn't get a lot of playing time, because he just doesn't believe, although Carlos is a young DP, so it's a little bit different. It's not as high a price point, but he expects them to be regular starting contributors who really lift the team up and can be, the core of the team. And also he sees the designated player slot as more valuable than the money that he's spending on them. So it will really depend on whether he wants to free that spot up for maybe someone else, rather than Carlos, and what he thinks Carlos can bring in his new system that he'll be bringing next year.
I definitely think part of that, fair or not for Carlos, that tag is what makes it harder for him. Yeah. He has a harder path than maybe like Rafael Ramos would, because Rafa's not a young DP. He's not a DP at all. Yeah. So everything that's tied up with that, what you get out of the tag is you pay a reduced amount of their salary. Yeah. With this tag, you only have to pay a certain amount. And so with all the mechanisms in MLS, it's fantastic that you have lots of different opportunities. But what the challenges are is the middle and lower end of the roster, where you need talent and depth to really carry you through. And if you're sinking a DP spot towards something that's not going to make huge impact or huge value, that's the challenge for a club. Because you have other clubs that you run into that have three Kaká-like players that are performing at a high level constantly, and so I think that's the wrestle match. It's not that Rivas is bad.
No, and
it's that he has that tag.
There's so much to consider too, because he's a young DP and his salary isn't as high as a typical regular DP. There's options to possibly buy him down out of DP side. There's just so many things to consider, and they really need to look at the different contracts that they have, how much money that they're going to have left over, and what options for other players in similar roles that they can bring in. So Carlos is definitely one of those players who I think Christ really likes what he's seen out of him, but it's a huge question mark because he might have more value being used in a trade situation, or might have to work something out money-wise.
Very interesting. So all those mechanisms, all those tags are part of the challenge in navigating MLS. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of rule changes, which are always make it even more fun. They roll out different things because they are, having spoken with Don Garber, he's really committed to making the middle of those rosters stronger, helping the teams really succeed and play high-level soccer. And they feel like, okay, we've got the top players at the top end. We've got a lot of talent coming in, a lot of talent that we've developed and that's come over from Europe. Feel good about that. Feel like the lower level, the subs are good, that they're solid at the bottom of the roster. But it's really the middle where you see a separation from teams that are in the playoffs now and teams that are not. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that was our last question. Oh, we got one more from Twitter. All right. Sandy, at Sandy71234. Who do you think will score the first goal for the Orlando Pride in Orlando City in the new stadium?
Oh, this is just total prediction.
Go for it.
All right. I say Kristen Edmonds for the Pride and Kevin Molino for Orlando City.
Okay. I'm going to jump in too. I'm going to say Jasmine Spencer for the Pride, and I'm going to say Nocerino. Just for fun.
Well, good luck with that one.
It's fun. Come on. No, really. I think actually there might be a huge effort to get Kaká that first goal. It was very meaningful for him when he got it in their debut, and I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to get it to him as well.
Agreed. I agree with that one more.
All right. I was kidding. I wanted to make her laugh. All right. I think we have no questions this week from Facebook, but we're going to double check the OS Lions account. And just a programming note, we are going to do one more show next Thursday after the season ends, just to wrap up where things stood, look back at the 2016 season, and then look ahead to what you can expect. Some thoughts on the offseason. We're sending a lot of reporters to this last game to try to talk to players right after the game, try to get a sense of how they feel about the year, and we'll be very excited to bring it to you. So, any other stoppage time questions, or are we?
There is. One I'm not too sure of because I haven't seen them speak. Oh, I just retweeted it from OS Lions. The wrong account. I'll just read it out loud. From Le Touche. Does Christ know enough Spanish to speak with Higuita and Rivas, or does he use an interpreter? Now, I'm not around Christ when he's with Higuita and Rivas too much, except when he's yelling on the field, and he does know enough Spanish to do that. But from what I understand, he does use help through other players who are bilingual to communicate with everybody. I know that he's relied heavily on Servando Carrasco in that aspect as an American who speaks Spanish as well and speaks both fluently and understands everybody really well. He's mentioned that before, that he's been really crucial and helpful in making sure that everybody's understanding what he's getting across. But yeah, he makes sure that they understand. For example, when he had to pull Carlos Rivas out of the game two or three games ago, when he had to pull him out before halftime because they were switching from the 4-4-2 back to the 4-2-3-1 because it wasn't really working. Carlos was visibly upset during that game that he came out, and it wasn't anything that he did, player-wise on the field. So Christ really had to make sure that he understood that and got that across. So I think in those situations he uses someone whose Spanish is a little more fluent.
I want to say I could have sworn I saw Bobby Murphy pull him aside right as soon as he came off the field to talk with him.
Bobby does speak Spanish, yeah.
So I think he was his translator for that one, and I think it's very helpful to have that, different people working together, and it seems like the players are really committed to translating for each other when necessary.
Well, they're also committed to learning the new languages and learning English. Julio Baptista, Antonio Nocerino, they've started doing interviews in English, even though they're a little broken. It's a little hard to understand them still. It's getting so much better within just a couple of months of being here. And they always kind of, when Carlos or Higuita step up to the cameras to do interviews, they always walk by and say, do it in English, So, everybody works on it as a whole.
It's very impressive. I mean, Kaká speaks 4 languages. I don't. So there you go.
Yep.
Very talented. All right. I think that was our last question. I'd just like to ask you about what you expect from the home finale. What are you hoping to see? What do you think is going to be coming up?
Yeah, so Jason said that he thinks that he's seen enough from everybody to give them evaluations and know exactly what type of player they are and what he has with them. So I would expect to see some of the players like Rafa again in the lineup to just see. He said he wanted to see, like, anybody can put in one good performance, but it's about stringing performances together. So some of those type of players, Rafa, Rivas, Mikey, Higuita, things like that, he might string together, and play them again to see if they can do the same thing that they did last time. But a lot of excitement, a lot of energy. They're really, really, really hoping to get this victory at home. They do not like that they've lost recent home games, and they want to go out on top in Camping World Stadium like they have done so many other seasons in the past.
All right, it'll be very interesting to see. I hear the weather is supposed to be gorgeous this weekend. Cold front moving through, which means it won't be sweltering. So we'll be interested to see how that all goes. And for all the latest updates about the lineups, in-game action, everything post-game, be sure to keep following Alicia DelGallo at OS Lions and at OS Alicia D with Alicia. I'm Iliana Limon-Romero at the Orlando Sentinel, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks.